It's been a real challenge, a real struggle lately. And I know I've talked to a lot of people that are going through the same type of thing. I'm going through it as well, where I've got these old identities of me, these old versions coming up. But I've had some tremendous breakthroughs over the past few days as we went through these portals. We went through the 222, the 3-3 portal now. We've got equinox coming up. All this amazing energy is providing us with an opportunity to really ground more of our higher self. And that's going to clear everything out that is in the way. So if you're experiencing a lot of mind chatter, monkey mind, overthinking, a lot of emotional stuff coming up, very, very heavy, no, you're on the right track. So what's happening is we have created, when we're born, we start to create these identities, these identifications. And a lot of times we think of them as protectors, a protective personality. They're all ego. Anytime we open our eyes and open our senses and rely on our five senses, know that you are identified as the human. And as the human, you're going to perceive and experience what you think are problems, because that's how the logical mind really translates energy. If it's dense energy, we're going to translate it as something that's just very fearful, very heavy, a problem. And if it's light energy, the mind is going to likewise translate into something that is maybe more powerful, more authentic, maybe courageous, courage, that type of thing. But know that they're all identities. And once you realize that, you're going to find that there's another way, instead of bouncing between these identities, to really bring something new forward. That's what I want to talk about in this video. So back, I'm going to date myself a little bit. Back when I was young, first video game comes out, it was Pong. Maybe some of you remember Pong. Maybe if you're younger, you've seen it on TV, you've seen it on YouTube, whatever, and you're familiar with what it is. But if you're not, it was a very simple game that was hooked up to the TV, and there were just two bars on either side, and you'd have a controller. You'd have one person controlling one bar and one would control the other, and the bars would move up and down like this. And there'd be a little ball that would bounce between the bars, and you had to continue to hit that ball, okay, depending on what side you were on. Essentially, that's the best way to describe it. So you would turn your little dial and you would raise your thing, and it was like a game of tennis, okay, on TV. So Pong is an excellent representation of what we're going through when we're trying to start to move through the healing process. And let me explain here what's happening. When we identify with fear, we have a situation that triggers us. We come up with this identity, this protective identity comes forward. It tries to solve the problem and identifies fear as a problem. It's a very heavy emotion, and we want to dive in and really try to think our way out of that, or bring it to fruition, or bring it to its end. And that takes a lot of energy. Okay. But when you decide to face the fear, and you've had situations when you were younger where you've done something scary, and then you've drummed up the courage to be able to go forward and do that very thing and overcome that fear, that's another identity that was created, another protective personality. We could call that personality courage. And that's the polar opposite, really, of that fear. So we have fear and we have courage. Okay, now, since we're identified as the human and we're playing in a 3D dimensional field, we're up here in that game of Pong, and the ball's bouncing back and forth. Okay, and you're constantly going to be moving through fear, or from fear to courage, because you're going to remember in the past how you overcame your fear, and you're going to drum up that emotion of courage. Okay, so you're playing within the 3D dimensional field, identified as the human, identified with a problem, and then creating an identity that's providing the solution, which is courage. And what you're doing is you're just simply bouncing back and forth between those polarities. We're in this time-space reality. This energetic manifestation of this reality creates polarities, and you are bouncing back and forth between these two polarities in that particular situation. Okay, but the interesting thing is you're still playing within that frequency of the third dimensional field, being identified as the human. Okay, you're conjuring up an energy to be able to solve a problem. Does that make sense? And what's not happening is you're not recognizing that there is a doorway or another way to get in touch with something that will completely change your reality. And this something is the real you. It is your higher self, your multidimensional self. And that doesn't lie within the game of Pong back and forth. It resides here in your heart. So you need to learn to start dropping into your heart and getting out of that game of Pong. Okay. And how do we do this? How do we get out of these identities and drop into the game of Pong? Well, in order to do that, we need to identify less as the human. Okay. So the more you are identified as this physical vessel, the more you are experiencing and relying on your five senses, the more you are creating this reality where there's a need for the protective personality or the ego to come forward, whether it be as fear to protect you from something or courage to come forward to overcome that fear. Okay, so once you start to realize there's another way, you could start to identify less as the human being. And we do that by coming into the heart, breathing into the heart, and finding that stillness. Okay, the more we come in, think of that Pong, that game as a line here, horizontal horizon line, where we're bouncing back and forth. When we could bring it down, we start to come into the vortex or singularity of the heart. We identify less with our senses, and we identify less as a human, and we start to tap into something greater, which is the real you. Okay, so as Joe Dispenza talks about, we try to become no thing, no body, no mind. Okay, we get into that stillness. Okay, so that's what we want to start to find. Now, when you can do that, you start to get a clearer picture of the multiple identities that you have created. For me, there's one that's created out of fear and anxiety of projecting things that might or might not happen, that usually never come to fruition, but it creates a lot of anxiety for me. Okay, that's kind of an identity or a story that I've told myself from a trauma I had when I was little. Okay, and in response to that, I've created a version of me that's just going to be more hardened, more aggressive, more assertive to really offset that fear so that I can navigate my way through the stories that I've created in my mind. Now, when I could identify less as either of those versions, and the important thing first is to recognize that both of those are ego. Both of those versions are ego. One may have you feel very empowered, but know that that's still ego because you're still identified as the human. You are creating an empowered version to offset the disempowered version or the fearful version. It's a balancing out kind of thing, but you're still playing within a lower dimensional field. Okay, lower frequency field. You're still playing as the human being. But when you can recognize that that's what's happening, the door opens up for something else to come through. And that is something that is made from other stuff. It's all energy. I'm not saying it's not energy. Everything is energy, but it's made from a different frequency, extremely high frequency, love, unconditional love, gratitude, appreciation, joy, those types of things. So when we start to get into the heart and breathe into the heart and detach and recognize that all of these things we're creating are multiple identities so that we can play out scenarios in this reality, right? This 3D matrix reality, we start to create that space and recognize that there is something different. There's a third choice that you can bring to the table, and that is to disidentify as the human and step into more of that energy that you truly are. And that energy is going to start to manifest as a consciousness, as a love. It's going to bring forward something new that is going to allow you to perceive the situation entirely different so that you don't have to create and use your energy to create these different identities to combat these various scenarios. Okay, so just as we see other players in our reality, other people playing their part in our movie, we're creating characters for us on the fly to play various parts in the movie as well. So we need to step back and realize it's all a movie and detach and disidentify from the human being. A while back, my Pleiadian guide said to me that the problems we have only are problems if we identify as the human being. So we want to identify as our higher self. We want to get in touch with that energy. We want to get in tune with that, which means we want to breathe into the heart space and find the stillness there. And we get as close to that as we can. And once you touch it, you're going to know it, because you're going to shift inside. Your frequency is going to rise, and you're going to bring forward a new perspective, and you're going to be able to experience whatever situation that you're anxious or fearful about, that there's another way to go about it. And that is from the perspective of love and this energy that you have inside here. And this goes to incorporate your root chakra, where you may be feeling insecure. Maybe you're feeling disempowered. Okay. Maybe you're feeling overly emotional. A lot of this stuff is represented in the lower chakras. We breathe into those, we anchor in, and we allow ourselves to be, and we go back to acceptance and allowance, and allow this new energy, this higher frequency version of you, to start to pour through your body. And with that, you will feel an empowering energy like you've never felt before. You will detach from your scenario or your situation. You're not going to become aggressive. You're not going to become powerful. You're going to become trusting, and you're going to become accepting, and know that whatever is occurring in your life is occurring for you in this moment, because it is an opportunity for growth. Something is knocking on that door, waiting to come forward. Now, as long as you play Pong in the third dimensional field, you're keeping that door closed. But as soon as you could drop out of that and into the heart, you're opening the doorway for something new to come through. So try a little bit less to create or manifest versions of you to combat the fears and the anxieties that you have. Okay. Let's try to not give energy to these identities, but allow these identities to come up when they're triggered, and recognize and feel the energy that is behind them, whatever's driving them. That's energy that is coming up to be alchemized. And when you can detach from them and breathe it back into your body, instead of playing that game of Pong, okay, you have the ability to heal. You're giving those identities space to exist. You're fully feeling them. You're bringing consciousness forward, something from within here that is new. And it heals these identities. It brings them all back into one, so that when a situation comes up, we don't have to keep splintering ourselves off and creating versions of us to deal with things. We allow the love to guide us, and we trust and we accept the journey as it unfolds, and know that you're the orchestrator of this, and that it is all happening for your growth. You've created it. Till next time, guys. Thank you.